Welcome back to my series where I review all of the 2021 new releases that I was able to read last year. Today we're going to be going over all the sci-fi books. Because I read so many books last year, I'm actually going to be doing what I'm calling rapid reviews.
Faster. Faster. Faster.
Trying out this new format, so let me know how that goes.
Begin.
So first up on this list of rapid reviews, the first four are actually books that I DNF'd, and the bottom of the list is The Velocity of Revolution. I was very excited for the diesel punk nature of it all, but the beginning scene has got a cool action sequence, but also like some weird drugs that are specific to this world, and the people who are taking them are able to kind of experience each other's bodies, and there's a weird sexual tension, and I just wasn't feeling it. This wasn't what I was going for. Maybe the rest of the book is really different, but that intro scene was not a way to grip me. Next up is Victories Greater than Death, and this leans a little bit too young on the YA side for me. Love the cover, love the purple hair, I was rocking that a lot last year, but also I felt kind of preached to with the author's political views. Every time she meets an alien, they introduce themselves and their pronouns, and I just can't imagine multiple worlds with species from like possibly even different galaxies from our own who've came to the same conclusion that this is how you should introduce yourself to people, the way that like a subset of Earth culture has. Do they even have gender? It was weird, and I didn't like feeling preached to. Next up is The All-Consuming World by Cassandra Kah, and I do not care how interesting this plot might be, the writing was so insufferable. The number of times that she repeats herself but in a different way, and the only thing separating the two instances is like a comma or a period. It's just back to back saying the same thing in a slightly different verbiage. And I get that she thinks she's a really great writer and has really interesting ways to put things, but you gotta edit it down and just pick one. Not to mention that a lot of the writing was very overly verbose. As an example, a complex obligato of woodwinds resounds is the intro to a sentence. That's just everything before the first comma. So I put this one down and canceled the next book that I had checked out from her.
Stop writing!
The last book that I DNF'd is Machinehood, and this one actually wasn't all bad. I think that it was a debut, and it's got a couple of little kinks that make it feel like a debut, and I don't really like feeling preached at, so I put this one down. Maybe I would come back to it. It had some interesting things to say about living in a surveillance state, and they had some interesting setups where you could have like a virtual appointment with your therapist, and then they assign some drugs to you, and you're able to concoct those pharmaceuticals right from your home. But ultimately I wasn't feeling it, so I put it down. And then starting with the books that I actually did finish, the first up, I don't know if it belongs this low on the list, but it did make me really mad by the time I finished it, and that's Gearbreakers. It was just a little bit too young YA leaning. It had a lot of tropes of YA that I'm not a particular fan of, and it felt like they were just stalling and prolonging things instead of carrying on with the plot by using miscommunication or just having people not talk to each other at all. And I'm not a big fan of that in books, so I will not be continuing on with the next one. They also had that trope where like all of the teenagers involved are not only fantastic in their chosen field, but the best in the world, and that just stretches my believability a little bit too much. The next book possibly should be lower, and that's Switch by A.S. King. Honestly, this whole book is one big metaphor, and I don't think I'm smart enough to understand it.
Oi, you are never gonna make sense, are you?
I just didn't get this one little bit, and I didn't enjoy any of the experience either. Future Failing has such a beautiful cover, and I love what it's about. I think it's super interesting, and I like the sense of humor that they had. A lot of the way that they phrased things in the beginning had me chuckling. But ultimately, this is not a book that was written for me, and that's okay. I really hope it finds its audience because I think that they'll really enjoy it. I kept trying to get into it, and I couldn't, and I really wish I loved this one more. Fragile Remedy has a super interesting premise. It's in a future where people are cultivated and created in a lab to use for medical purposes. They're not necessarily meant to like have a life or grow up or experience the world, but the main character was broken out of that facility early, and as such they're dealing with a built-in expiration date because the company never intended them to be used for anything except for organ harvesting and whatnot. So I think that that's a really complex and interesting subject, But ultimately, this one focused more on the romance. It had a love triangle, and one part of that triangle was super, like, abusive and manipulative, and I didn't really like that bit. So I wish it had been more about the plot and less about the relationships. When the Sparrow Falls feels like a book that's probably more so oriented towards middle-aged white men. I was not the target audience for this book. It's got some interesting bits. It kind of feels almost like Cold War Russia, but in the future, and you're dealing with AIs and whatnot. But it's got very much that kind of spy, espionage kind of vibe. Unlike the last one, I think this one was too much plot and not enough characters, to the point that I don't even think the author liked the characters. We're following through a single POV, but that character's story ends, and then the book just continues on for another 50 pages. And it feels like a dry history book, except it's even worse because it's recounting fake future events, so I'm not even learning anything from it. Just a really weird decision. Sun Daughters, Sea Daughters is a super short novella. It was kind of sold as a premise of like The Little Mermaid in space. But again, I think that this one focuses just too much on the relationship. I think sometimes messy people and their relationship drama can be super interesting. I just don't want it to be the main focus of the book. I don't think it's enough to carry the book, especially one this short. And that's all I really felt I got from this and what was explored. Persephone Station is a gorgeous cover. I love that art style, and I think that the color is so fantastic and bombastic. We don't really get that in sci-fi, and as someone who likes to rainbowify their shelves, I was really hoping to be able to add this one to my collection. Unfortunately, it has a lot of really cool concepts, like manufactured species, colonialism and colonization out in outer space, in planets. But a lot of the plot, especially as we get into the 50% mark and onward, felt very Home Alone, but not in a fun way. However, I will say it was a decent enough read, and even though it looks really thick, it actually reads super fast because they chose a very large font and wide spacing. And last on the list of rapid reviews is Fugitive Telemetry. I love Murderbot so much. This is not my favorite Murderbot though. This is probably my least favorite Murderbot, mostly because I was looking forward to actually starting to do plot progression. I felt like book 5, where we left off, was really starting to point in a particular direction, so I was totally thrown off guard when book 6 came around and felt like another side quest romp. It wasn't bad, it just isn't my favorite, and I felt very disappointed because it didn't go in the direction I thought we were leading up to after 5.
Mission accomplished.
I have no idea what you're talking about. This is definitely the exact same day and same outfit as the clip that came before this one and the clip that's coming after. Dustborn is a YA dystopian that very heavily draws inspiration from previous franchises like Waterworld and Mad Max. I think that it executed well on everything that it set out to do, and I definitely remember not only the story but the characters and the major plot beats. It has some interesting things to say about using drug addiction as a means of enslavement, and overall I thought it was a pretty decent book. I would definitely recommend this to any teen readers in your life who are into the dystopian genre. The next book on this list is Firebreak, which I thought did a really good job executing on what it set out to do. In this world, we're looking at corporations that are essentially governments. We're looking at a purposeful restricting of resources, propaganda, and also how they view children as assets if they do unethical, immoral, illegal experimentation and actions on these children.
But that would be irresponsible and unethical.
Especially in a time of warfare, where are the lines? Primarily, this takes place in a virtual world. A lot of the people, and especially the main character that we're following, live their lives online. And in particular, you can hit it really big if your channel is streaming when you come across one of these legendary and exclusive heroes in the game. But these heroes are also real people who are heroes in real life, fighting on the war front. And while this may not be the most original book I've ever read, it really executed on what it meant to do, and I think that it did some interesting things with how it treated regular tropes or kind of turned them on its head a little bit. So I enjoyed this, it was a fun time, and I think it's a really good like summer read. Next up is We Could Be Heroes, and I really enjoyed the first 100 or so pages of this book. I like what it's doing with heroes and villains and turning those tropes on their head. We have a villain who's very scary and can kind of control your mind, but at the same time he really cares about returning his library books on time or taking care of his cat normal. And then we have our hero who is just an absolute mess of a person, getting day drunk and prone to emotional outbursts or being overly aggressive towards other people. Where this book kind of fell apart for me is towards the end of it, where we get into the antagonist and their whole motivation. It just felt very standard and kind of like they felt they needed to have that conflict but didn't have big ambitions for it. I really think that where their originality and their idea was in the beginning of the book, and the rest was more of what you needed to have that standard story arc 3-act structure. But the beginning, definitely a fun time. Next on this list is Dead Space, and I really quite liked this one. It's taking place in outer space. We're following along with someone who used to be like a research scientist working with AIs, and their team was set to go off in a spaceship, but something happened and it blew up, and most everyone died. Everyone who didn't die was left in not such good shape. Fortunately, unfortunately, a corporation came along not too long after and was able to foot the expenses for the medical bills and make them functional again. However, they didn't do it out of the goodness of their little corporate hearts. They footed these people with the bill. So they're essentially working as indentured servants to pay off that medical debt.
I'm escaping to the one place that hasn't been corrupted by capitalism. Space!
When we start the novel, the main character has just kind of been in contact again with one of the other survivors, and then the next day after she was talking to him, he's dead. And that doesn't match up at all, so she gets really suspicious and decides to use her position within the company to go and investigate.
What makes you think it was murder?
And then from there, it kind of turns into this like closed room whodunit, because we're off on a remote space rock with very few inhabitants who could have means, let alone motivation, to have killed him. And I just had a fun time. It definitely had thrills, some of those like anxious moments, who did it, and interesting little unique sci-fi elements. Then there's The End of Men. I believe this was a Goodreads Choice Award nominee, and I think it honestly deserved it. This was a really good book. It does exactly what you would think from the title, but the way that they examine it, the different approaches and facets of society, all the different little viewpoints that they use, I thought it was really thorough and a lot of things I wouldn't have considered otherwise, so it was very interesting. And is it weird to say this is a fun book, that The End of Men was kind of fun? Definitely give it a go though. It was interesting. Now, I'm not the kind of person who would ever really have like a guilty pleasure. If I enjoy it, I enjoy it. I don't need to feel guilt about that. But if I were gonna have a guilty pleasure, it'd probably be this next book, and that's The Doors of Sleep. Because I know, deep down in my heart, that this is not the best book. The construction it's fine. I think that the end really deteriorates from a lot of the rest of it, but I just had so much fun. This has really interesting and creative ideas, and a terribly OP character that I absolutely adore anyway. Doors of Sleep is the first in a series where we're following along with a main character who has this disease. Every time he falls asleep, he wakes up in a new reality. If he meets up with someone and they fall asleep and he's touching them while he falls asleep, they can travel with him to the next reality that he goes to. So occasionally he does travel with companions. And at the point in the story that we've met him, he's traveling with someone right now, but also he's been to a lot of worlds already. So he's kind of leveled up. He's not exactly like your average Earth Joe. He's got a couple new abilities, a couple really cool like items of clothing and whatnot. He's got drugs that can sometimes sustain him so that he's able to stay awake for as long as almost a week in certain worlds before he inevitably has to fall asleep again and travel on to the next reality. I think the author did a good job of making the worlds feel unique and interesting, and I really like it. I had a fun time, and the character I mentioned who's very OP, I love them so much. So I'm looking forward to seeing more in this series. For the next book, I wasn't 100% sure of whether or not it's like a thriller or a sci-fi, because it kind of does both. But I'm pretty sure it was a Goodreads nomination in the sci-fi category, so that's where I put it to. And that's Girl 1. In the past, 9 women and 1 scientist formed this kind of commune where they found a way for all of these women to reproduce without men through parthenogenesis. And eventually all of these women got pregnant and gave birth to daughters. But then something happened, and 1 or more people ended up dying. The group split up and went their separate ways, especially the first pair, the mother and the daughter, who they call Girl 1 because she was the first one born. In the present day, her mother has gone missing, and so now she has to go on this little mission. She's on like a road trip visiting all of these people from the past and trying to retrace their steps, find out where her mother is gone, and bring her back home. But she's also learning a lot of things because she was pretty young when things happened, and as it turns out, she and her mother are most isolated from the rest of the community. And also, as is mentioned in the synopsis, it's possible that these girls have some devastating abilities. I really enjoyed it. I thought it was a great fun time, a really good like summer action type of flick. What do you call a book like a summer action movie? Is there a summer action book? Can I call this a summer action book? It was fun. I enjoy it and definitely recommend. Is it a popcorn read? Can I say popcorn read? I might just call them popcorn read. The last book that I'm definitely filming on the same day as before is We Are Satellites. And this is kind of like Black Mirror, but instead of being devastating and making you lose all faith in humanity, it's kind of hopeful and sweet. So in the not too distant future, a technology's been developed and it can be an implant on your brain that makes you just smarter, better, faster. Your senses are upped, you have better memory recall, and just everything is enhanced. And not only do politicians and celebrities and everyone talk about how their life has been changed by this great new thing, it starts to almost be required to the point that society breaks into almost a subclass of people who don't have it. But instead of watching everything from this huge blown out lens, we have a really insular view at one family and how all their lives are affected, the interpersonal relationships, their career trajectory, and all of those sort of things, how they're all impacted by this one technology. So on one side, you have the very driven workaholic mother who works for a very famous local politician and is just driven in her work to keep being able to perform and produce results over and over and over again better than anybody else. There's also their son, and he is kind of like a scholarship kid at a very fancy rich school, so all of his peers are obviously early adopters on this type of technology, and he's going to be left behind. So he's very peer pressured into getting this in order to maintain his chances of keeping up with the schoolwork and getting into college and all that. On the other side, you have their other mother who's kind of skeptical of everything that's going on. She doesn't like this new technology. She doesn't like how quick people are to adopt it. She definitely wants to ask more questions and find out more about what kind of testing, if any, has been done to this point. And then lastly is their daughter, and she actually suffers from epilepsy, so she's ineligible for getting the implant. And so just kind of watching all of their lives, how this one technology is able to affect and impact everything that happens to them, I thought it was really, really solidly well done and definitely stuck with me. The second to last book on this list is Defekt. This is a follow-up to Fina. Originally, the author didn't know that they would be writing any other books in this world, and then they had the idea and were like, oh, I need to write this. This is following a world where it's a not IKEA, definitely not IKEA, you know, totally not IKEA. And because of the nature of the business, weird things just kind of happen. Portals open up and suck away customers. Furniture comes to life and has like pincers and eye stalks. I don't know what you call it in the book world. I know in the board gaming world, when something comes out that's like a sequel and you can use it as an expansion for the original base game, or you can kind of use it like a new base game, a 2.0 version on its own. We call those an expandalone. It's a standalone game, it's an expansion for the original, it's an expandalone. So that's what I'm going to call Defekt here. You don't need to have read Fina in order to enjoy Defekt. And honestly, I think I enjoy Defekt more. I go back and forth on it, but I really, really enjoyed Defekt. We're following a side character that's mentioned in Fina, and this is Derek. He's the employee of the month. He's perfect in every way. Just a company man through and through.
Derek. Derek.
And one day he's asked to stay after and go after some of these defective furniture, like toy chests with pincers and whatnot that I was mentioning. To help him, there's a special squadron called in, and hold up, they're all Dereks?
Derek.
You have a female Derek, you have a teenager Derek just kind of stuck in perpetual puberty, you have a very sexy Derek, and then kind of a Fred of the group, like a Scooby-Doo type of Fred where he's the all-American good boy, very leadership and by the rules, and they're all here to help him out. I've gotta say, this is one of the queerest books I've read, and I mean queer in like a gay way. But it's just so much fun. I had a great time with this. I saw today that it's actually one of the finalists for the Philip K. Dick Awards for 2022, and I was so excited because I feel like this book kind of got ignored by everyone. It's so short, but it's so much fun. It's got a lot of anti-capitalist sentiment and just a great sense of humor and strange sci-fi happenings, so definitely give this one a go. My favorite sci-fi that came out in 2021 was A Psalm for the Wild Built by Becky Chambers. I already briefly mentioned this in another video, and it's just a warm hug. It feels like having tea with Uncle Eero, and he's telling you all of the wonderful things about yourself.
Sharing tea with a fascinating stranger is one of life's true delights.
It's got interesting little world building elements in the background, and I really like them. I hope that we get more. I don't even necessarily need them to be in the forefront, just a couple of little bits that make me interested in the world, make it come alive in that special way. But the characters are very charming, and the conversations that they have are just so interesting to be able to watch and hear. And even though it was really short, thinking of this book just always makes me smile. So I definitely think it was great, and I'm very interested in picking up more from Becky Chambers. This is hands down my choice for the Goodreads Choice nominees. I really loved it, and I think everyone would be able to get something from it. So those are all of the sci-fi books that I managed to read that came out in 2021. Have you read any of the books on this list? Are there others that I missed that I should check out? Which one of these books was your favorite? Let me know. Comment down below. I love to chat with you guys. Please feel free to like and subscribe as well. Next time I'm going to start getting into the fantasy books that I read, and oh boy, it's a lot of books. There's a lot of fantasy. So I'm going to be breaking it up into YA and adult fantasy, and I will see you then. That is not a cool thing to do. Nope.
Ooh, self-burn. Those are rare.
See you next time. Bye.
Oh, hi.